I have several questions that I'd like to ask Senator Murphy through the chair today, but I want to start by thanking my friend Chris Murphy. I'm really proud to call him a colleague. I am proud of seeing him take this stand. I'm proud that he is forcing us to have this conversation. You know, we all get sent here by our constituents to make tough decisions and to find the truth and to find a path forward. And I'm really proud of him for not letting this go quietly with just another moment of silence and no action. I think since Sunday, most of us have been walking around feeling literally sick to our stomachs with a sickness that's not going away. I know our whole country is just so weary of seeing shooting after shooting and not seeing action and change and something meaningful from all of us. You know, I was really proud to see my constituents fill Morningside Park and Albuquerque and Pioneer Women's Park in Las Cruces and the Plaza in Santa Fe, St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Roswell, Orchard Park in Farmington, all to remember the victims in Orlando and to say to their families, we are not going to forget them, and to say that to that entire community that when the LGBT community is attacked, really all of us are attacked. And so I came down here because I can't believe that we're going to let this happen again and not change something. And that goes to what I want to ask the senator from Connecticut about. I'm here because I know that we can take tangible steps to make our country safer again. Steps that are not a burden to gun owners like me. And Senator Murphy and I have talked about this at length. We're friends, our families are friends, our kids are friends. This is not about creating a burden for law-abiding gun owners. It's not about a threat to the Second Amendment. What has become clear is that there are simply critical junctures where we have to be able to identify those who would do us harm. You know, whether it's a young person drastically losing their way or a potential terrorist who is intent on doing harm to others, there are times when we have to be able to step in. Now, it is no secret that I have always believed that law-abiding citizens should be able to own firearms for sport, for self-defense. A lot of New Mexicans do just that and do it with incredible responsibility, but I simply can't stand by and let this pass with just another moment of silence. It's personal. You know, as a parent of a 13-year-old, as a parent of a 9-year-old, and watching what happened at Sandy Hook in Senator Murphy's home state, without believing there must be something more that we can do, I find it so frustrating that kids today in elementary school and middle school have to do things that we never had to do when we were growing up. Practice sheltering in place and what happens in an active shooter situation. Our kids simply shouldn't have to do that. So I think we owe it to the American people to take real action, to reduce the violence in our communities. And I truly believe that keeping guns out of the hands of people who are frankly legally prohibited from having them is just such common sense. The fact that we're arguing about this is a little bit unfathomable. But that's all we're talking about with background checks. That's what background checks do. That's what closing the terror gap would do. You know, I can't tell you how many times I have been through the background check process. And I want to ask Senator Murphy through the chair, if I have to pass a background check to buy a deer rifle, why shouldn't firearm sales made on the internet or at a gun show require such a simple procedure that makes sure that law-abiding people have access to firearms and make sure that people who aren't law-abiding, who have been convicted of a felony, who are on the potentially could be on the terrorist watch list, and we're going to talk a little bit about closing that gap. Why shouldn't we make sure that all of our firearms sales cut a clear and decisive line between the law-abiding and those who have lost their rights through the actions that they have taken?
I thank the senator for his question, and I really appreciate him outlining at the beginning of his question that not only is the senator from New Mexico a gun owner, but he's a proud gunner. He's an active hunter and somebody who cares very deeply about Second Amendment rights. And his question is spot on. Why would you have a system that requires Senator Martin Heinrich to go get a background check when you buy a gun at a gun store, but not require an individual to get a background check when they buy a gun at a gun show? And the reality is that when this law was passed, the intention was for the background check to cover almost all commercial sales in the country. But it was passed at a time when almost all commercial sales were being done in gun stores. What has happened is since that law was passed, gun sales have migrated, for reasons that you can understand, away from bricks and mortar stores onto internet sales and to these gun shows. And so really all we're asking, I guess, is for the text of the law to basically re-up on the original law's intent. The Manchin-Toomey bill, for instance, still doesn't contemplate, a sale of a gun from a father to a son or from a neighbor to a neighbor to be subject to a background check. But if you are advertising your gun on the internet or you are going to an organized marketed gun sale, then you should go through that background check. And I saw you nodding when Senator Bennett mentioned that the average background check takes under 10 minutes. And so some people say, oh, we can't have background checks, it's so onerous. No, everybody that's gone through a background check, can tell you that you are, by and large, in and out of there in a very short amount of time. And frankly, the people who aren't in and out of there in a short amount of time, sometimes that's for a reason. And that's important to remember. So I yield for additional questions.
Well, I want to get to a second question, but I want to say that's absolutely accurate. I can tell you that I don't think it's ever taken me more than 15 minutes to go through that process. And as a law-abiding gun owner, as somebody who's taught my kids how to be responsible with firearms, I don't want criminals to be in possession of firearms. I don't want someone who has been convicted of domestic violence to be in possession of firearms. This is about separating the law-abiding from terrorists and criminals. What could be more common sense? So if you look at federal law, it literally identifies 10 categories of individuals who today are prohibited from shipping or transporting or receiving firearms or even ammunition because we have made the judgment through our judicial system and through our laws that they present a threat to public safety. I mean, this list includes convicted felons, as it should. It includes fugitives. It includes drug addicts, people who are committed to mental health institutions. It includes undocumented immigrants. It includes anyone who's received a dishonorable discharge from the military, someone who has renounced their U.S. citizenship, or someone with a restraining order for domestic violence or misdemeanor convictions for domestic violence. And finally, it includes anyone who's under a felony indictment. And to me, the Second Amendment that Senator Murphy was speaking of, the Second Amendment, not to the Constitution, but the Second Amendment to this bill, it speaks to whether it shouldn't be true that someone who is suspected of terrorism should not be considered as unfit to own and use a firearm legally as someone who has been dishonorably discharged or has renounced their U.S. citizenship. And we're talking about people who have gotten on the no-fly list, for example, for some very real reasons. So I want to ask Senator Murphy, through the chair, that if the FBI or our intelligence community believes that someone is such an imminent threat, that they are so dangerous that we cannot allow them to board a commercial airliner, shouldn't they also be prohibited from buying a gun? Or shouldn't we at least let the Attorney General flag that sale and do something about it?
I thank the Senator for the question. The amendment that's been filed by Senator Feinstein is pretty plain in its wording. It says that the Attorney General can deny the transfer of a firearm based on the totality of circumstances, that the transferee represents a direct threat to public safety based on a reasonable suspicion that the transferee is engaged or has been engaged in conduct constituting in preparation for, in aid of, or related to terrorism, or provided material support or resources thereof. There's not a single member coming down to this floor and suggesting that people that are on the no-fly list today should be taken off of it because their right to fly has been abridged, or that there are names on the list that shouldn't be. That would be ludicrous. No one is going to suggest that we should allow people who meet that criteria be allowed to fly in this country. And so why on earth would we allow them to purchase a gun? I would hope that our colleagues would take a close look at this language that Senator Feinstein has filed. It's different from her initial amendment, and it's very clear and straightforward that if you are deemed to be a potential threat to the United States because of connections to terrorists, you probably shouldn't be buying dangerous assault weapons. I yield for a question.
And isn't it true, to Senator Murphy through the chair, that there are due process protections in this amendment, so that if someone were to find themselves on a list, that there is a right to redress, so that we ensure not only that terrorists can't simply walk into a gun store or go online and buy firearms, but also so that there is due process.
And I thank the Senator for that question, because that's kind of the red herring that gets thrown into this mix, is that, yes, we all agree that we don't think that people who are on the no-fly list should get guns, but it's about the mistakes that are made there. No, there is, in Senator Feinstein's amendment, I know she'll speak to it over the course of the debate, there is a process for individuals to remedy any erroneous denial of a firearm. So there is going to be an explicit process set up with which to do that. And I think Senator McCaskill said this earlier. She, remarked at the bipartisan reverence that is showered upon law enforcement. And that's wonderful that we support our members of law enforcement. But then why don't we trust them to make decisions about when they have information that would make them very worried about a specific individual buying a firearm? Why don't we trust them to make that decision if we all agree that we trust them to make other decisions to keep us safe? Yielding for additional questions.
I was looking at updated data from the Government Accountability Office that sort of leads to my next question, and it shows that known or suspected terrorists pass a background check to purchase a firearm or to purchase explosives 91% of the time. The terrorists themselves have actually identified this weakness. They know it exists. We see this, I sit on the Intel Committee, and we look at what they communicate to each other so that we can learn how to make our country safer. There was an Al-Qaeda video in 2011 that literally instructs potential terrorists to take advantage of our incomplete background check system. There have been a number of terrorist attacks in recent years where giving the Attorney General the authority to prohibit a suspected terrorist from purchasing a firearm could have at least thrown up meaningful barriers. And I think most notable was the horrendous Fort Hood shooting in 2009, where Major Nidal Hassan was able to pass a background check and buy a handgun, even though he was under an active FBI investigation for links to terrorism. He went on to shoot and kill 13 people. He wounded 30 others. So if we're saying that whole categories of other people present such a public safety threat and shouldn't have access to firearms, I just can't believe that we shouldn't at least give the Attorney General the ability to put terrorists on the same do not buy list. Why wouldn't we do that, Senator Murphy?
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. It's hard to understand why we wouldn't do that, especially when, as you noted, when people on that list go in and buy a gun, they are almost universally successful in walking away with that weapon. It doesn't happen very often. I mean, let's be realistic about what the numbers are. I think I read them earlier, and there were, from 2004 to 2014, 2,233 instances where suspected terrorists attempted to purchase a gun. And as you said, 91% of those incidents, they were successful. So, you're only talking about 200 or so incidences a year. Now, of course, those are the only ones we know about because those are the ones that actually went through a background check. We don't actually know about all the people on the no-fly list who tried to buy a weapon successfully online or at a gun show. We know about these that rated about 200 a year. But the reality is that terrorists today who are trying to perpetrate attacks on American citizens, lately they have not been using a bomb or an explosive device to carry out that attack. They have been using weapons, in the latest attack, an assault weapon. And so, we should just wake up to the weapon of choice of terrorist attackers and adopt this common sense measure. Yield for a question.
Well, I have one last question for my colleague from Connecticut, and this one's probably the hardest one, is simply why? Why is this so hard? And, I stand here as a gun owner. I have looked at each of these amendments through the lens of what it means to be a law-abiding gun owner in this country with both rights and responsibilities. That's why we have hunter safety before we ever go out into the field as a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old. And I just don't see anything in these two amendments that is an unreasonable burden to someone like myself. So why is it so hard to even have this conversation on the floor of the Senate? Why is it so hard to get a vote? And more importantly, why is it so hard to change these policies and these laws to try to make our country just a little bit safer?
I guess, Senator Heinrich, if I had the 100% correct answer to that question, we probably wouldn't be sitting here because we would have probably figured out how to solve it. And it's just such a unique issue in the American public sphere today, where 90% of the American public wants something to happen, and this body won't do it. It's only controversial in the United States Congress. It's not controversial in people's living rooms. It's frankly not controversial in gun clubs, right? I mean, you sit in a gun club and talk about whether a person who's been suspected of ties to terrorists should be able to buy a gun. There's a consensus there, too. So we talked about the sort of cornucopia of reasons why this doesn't happen. It's part a story of influence of the gun lobby. It's part a misinterpretation of the nature of the Second Amendment. It's part a belief that more guns make people safer, which the data does not show you. It's part an answer in how voters prioritize the things they care about, that the 10% that doesn't agree is calling into people's offices at a level that the 90% aren't. And lastly, in part, it's an indictment of us. It's an indictment of those of us who have just let business as usual run on this floor, mass shooting after mass shooting. And the reason why we have chosen to do something exceptional, which is to hold up work on the CJS appropriations bill until we get an agreement to move forward on these two issues, is because we have something to answer for here as well. Maybe we haven't fought as hard as we should in order to get this done. And this may not get us there. I mean, we still need votes from Republicans. We can call for a vote, but we ultimately need them to vote yes on that. But at least we are showing the American public that we care as deeply as we should about ending this slaughter. And I'd be happy to yield for
I want to thank Senator Murphy for everything you've done on this issue. and for not taking no for an answer, and I would yield back to Senator Murphy the rest of my time.